Hi, I'm Leon from the Qemists.
I'm Dan.
We're going to talk through how we made one of our tracks. In this case it's Renegade VIP. It's a remix of one of the tracks on our album. We wanted to kind of do a club version that we can play in our DJ sets and our sound system sets, give to other people. The track's gone really well, so hopefully you can get something from us talking you through how we made it.
Yeah, we just wanted to take you through the process of remixing this and how it's kind of started as a full track in Cubase, and then what we're going to take out, remove, change, etc., and the projects it then goes through to kind of reach its final finished destination, as it were.
Yeah, so this is the track from the album. It's a full vocal track. It's kind of dubstep tempo, but there's a lot of rock stuff in there. Play you a bit.
Red lights, green lights, all this start the movement. Suits and ties just spread confusion. Face the reality and break the illusion. Nothing to give, then you got nothing to lose. Nothing to show, that means there's nothing to prove.
So we were happy with that. I mean, thought it sounded good, but there were some things that need to change for a club version, something that sounds really good on a sound system is what we were after. First of all, the drums. It's a really rocky drum sound. A lot of live kit in there. Obviously it's layered to give it that fatness and some punch around 200, which is important in the snare. But it's still a very kit-like drum sound, and that needs to be sorted out. So that was the first thing we wanted to change with the VIP. Also, the bass line is probably a bit light and a bit smooth for something that hasn't got vocals in. It's kind of designed to fit in this mix, so we needed something a lot more modern that would really fill the sound system. So we're going to take that into the next project and start messing with it as well. Strip out a lot of the vocals and get the structure really easy to DJ as well. That's going to be quite important. So we'll go over to the next project that we worked on, kind of here's one I made earlier style, and show you what the next thing we did was.
So we've got here the kind of the next incarnation of this project. It's been saved as a new version, and we've started stripping the extraneous parts out, things that we really don't want for a kind of a dance floor mix of this size. Certainly, I'm afraid MCID's wrapped vocals have been scrapped, and started putting it into a kind of structure straight away for a dance floor tune. So got I think we've got a 32 bar intro, because certainly at 140 BPM, 32 bars is kind of a minute and a quarter, so we're looking at that kind of time to be hitting our drop.
We looped up the hook as well, I think, over the intro. Really basic arrangement. Working out what bits we want to keep from the original tune, really. It's a remix. So one thing we've added is this synth here.
Yeah, so a new set of chords basically that kind of still go with the vocal, but are slightly different from the original.
We wanted something a bit airier, a bit more ethereal over the intro and the drop. In fact, there's a bit more effects and a bit more depth to, because we've got more space now. We've taken out a lot of the vocals, so something more simple but kind of bigger. And this synth is a patch in Zeta. It's been messed with quite a lot. It's one we use a fair bit. I think we've automated a filter to build up on this. It's velocity sensitive, so what we've done is build up the velocity, which affects the filtering.
If we look at
It can be quite nice.
if we look at the synth, there's just a curve on the velocity for all the filters cut off. So yeah, the harder you play it, the more high end you get basically.
The important thing really to go from a preset in this synth to something we could use was to get the EQ right, and keep boosting the gain and cutting the EQ. we've actually got, as well as a chopper which is providing a kind of pumping effect, we've actually got 2 EQs on this. There's an EQ added here to cut out a lot of the frequencies we don't want, always using the spectrum analyzer to work out what it is that needs to be cut. It's a little bit hard when it's filtered, but later on you can see we don't want anything getting too harsh as this synth comes up, so we want to try and keep that line flat. So there's a bunch of things cut. We've then added a distortion to bring everything up because we wanted more distortion on the sound. Again, you can do this if you're looking at the analyzer. Add distortion all you like, just see where it's peaking too hard. Anything that distortion's introducing you don't want, you can then cut it. So there's actually a second EQ on here. So we take the original sound, EQ it, and then distort it, which of course adds volume and gain as well as other harmonics. And then we've cut the results of that distortion using another EQ and then boosted the gain on that EQ so that we can bring it back to the gain that we want. Always try and keep the gain where you need it to be.
And we'll do this quite a lot on a lot of different sounds, is make a sound, EQ it to be quite smooth, then add distortion and, like you say, EQ again. But it's not just this sound, it happens to almost everything, this kind of process of going through several EQs.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning the analyzer again. A lot of people, they know what an analyzer is, they know how to use it, but maybe using it on the whole track. Use it on everything. When you start adding a sound, just look at that sound in the analyzer straight away. Your kick drum, is that how you want it to look? Is it peaking where you want it to peak? Is there any sub on that hi-hat that you can't hear? Just keep looking at things in the analyzer and keep them flat. As it will make it easier to mix if you start with each of your sounds nice and flat in the analyzer. It's still a bit jumpy, to be honest. Yeah, flattish, yeah, like that could be better, and with better EQ, you can keep going forever. But any little peak that you can see is going to have an effect in the final mix. So think about whether you're going to allow that or not. So we've added a synth to give it a bit of reverby niceness. That's actually made from a saw wave, another saw wave, another saw wave. All those 1 octave up, 1 octave up, 0, 3 octaves down. That's a noise octave wave in zeta, which is adding a lot of the nice sort of reverby release tail to it, giving us that ethereal sound that we want.
So still in this project, we've kind of made the intro and just made a big build up towards our kind of, at the moment, imaginary drop. Just made kind of a bunch of whatever you want to call them, risers, or we tend to call them, and there's actually about 4 or 5 layered together here, and they're all, we silo these up, just a selection of noisy, well,
Again, intensity.
right up until the drop. And most of these have been made in other projects. Some have been made with Massive, some have been made with the sampler and Ableton, just kind of wherever and whenever really. Some were made from kind of little synth hits, some were kind of literally oscillators, like noise oscillators, kind of pitching up and filtering up. And I mean, certainly with these, we just kind of I spent a day just making tons and tons of risers, just bouncing them, pumping them, different pitches, different tempo. And one little trick as well is to try and keep your risers actually starting and ending at the kind of root of your track. So I think we're in G here, so I made sure they kind of start on G and actually then build up to that same note, just so they kind of really sit nicely. So play them in the mix. Like
We've taken everything out of the drop that we didn't want from the original tune, which left us with not very much. Jiggled the drums around a bit to give us the beat that we wanted, They're basically the same drum sounds as the original tune, but again, to keep with that airy sort of filling the room kind of sound, we've added a load of reverb to the snare, and I think we've probably done a bit of EQing on that kick as well.
The drums in this project are actually quite simple compared to a lot of our tracks. We've kind of found recently maybe that kind of less is more sometimes with drums, and just getting sounds to fat and smooth rather than using a lot of layers to try and make sounds bigger.
Again with the EQing, a lot of specific cuts on that EQ, and then the output is boosted by 3 dB to compensate for what we think we cut out. So pretty flat on the snare. It's got a lot of treble right up to the top. We might get rid of that in the master or at some point in the mix, but for now we'll keep it in right up to 20k. The main thing worth noting on the analyzer is that the 200 Hz peaks over the 10 line. Now anything that peaks over that 10 line has the potential to limit out a sound system when it's being DJ'd. I don't know why it's the 10 line that it seems to be universal to all sound systems, but anything that goes over that line could potentially cause other sounds to get quieter or distorted, leaving itself in the mix. Because we come from a drum and bass heritage, we make sure that's the snare that's going to do that. The snare and the sub are allowed to go over that line, nothing else is. If you had your treble over that line, as the track got louder and louder and more distorted, it would get harsher and harsher and harsher. No one wants that. But if you can keep hearing that snare, possibly the kick in a track like this, and definitely the sub, as the track gets more and more distorted, it will get fatter and fatter, louder and louder, and the sound quality will degrade, but people will still be able to dance to it. So you're not always working on a perfect sound system, and DJs do tend to go into the red on mixers. So that line there, minus 10 dB for any frequency, is the line that you want to work to. Only push things above that if you want them to be the loudest thing in the track consistently. In fact, it could push down the whole level of the master of the track to that line. So I think you'll find you want your drums and your bass nice and warm in the mix.
It's a really great way to get your sub at the right volume as well. Certainly, I mean, there's probably very few monitoring environments that you can really trust your ears to tell you the volume that your sub should be at, and again, this analyzer is just the perfect way to get it dB perfect volume wise. I mean, it's the only way we found really. We used to do it without, and we'd do it by ear and play tracks out and be too much sub, not enough sub. And
you can never tell in this room, even if you have great speakers and great ears and a great room. I'm not sure that at that frequency your ear would be able to tell a difference of 2 dB up or 2 dB down accurately. You'd be able to tell the difference, but as to actually knowing which one was correct, I think you've got to go back to an analyzer, because it does steer you in the right direction. So we had a snare, we wanted more atmosphere to it, so we wanted a good reverb on it. This is what it sounds like completely dry, or one layer of it. It's not what we need in this track. So with the reverb added, the really long tail to fill up the slow tempo. Doesn't have to be done that way, but it just seemed to fit with this track. Snare's actually just one sample coming out of Contact, one channel. We've got a bit of reverb on it here, using a send, and we've actually used reverb, a very good quality reverb called Altiverb for this. If you've got the processor power and you've got a few good reverbs that are going to be really important to the track, this is the plugin to go to. We're using a model of a plate reverb. It's a reverb modeling plugin, and it just doesn't have any of that sort of multi-story car park, echoey, tinny, slapback kind of effect to it. It's completely smooth. I don't know the details about how many times it oversamples or whatever, but it sounds really good.
And there's just a limiter in the chain after the reverb just to really squash that tail, and I don't know how hard it's hitting it. Yeah. So it's got quite a lot of gain reduction on the reverb to really kind of bring that out.
So what's important is the choices that you make. That's what producing is. So we've taken everything out of the drop of this track and decided that we're going to redo it, except for a couple of little bits that we like from the track. Just those two synth notes, we thought let's keep those, we can do something with that. And then I think at the end of the bar there's a couple of bars of bass that we're going to sample, and then we're going to take all that into Ableton and mess around with it in audio form in order to make ourselves a drop. Ableton's a great tool for doing that. You can mess around with audio more than you can in Cubase. So we're going to go into Ableton and then come back to Cubase.
So we've done a mix down out of Cubase of the intro we were working on and basically the drum beat. So that's it. And
put a couple of edits in there just to give us the bits we wanted. These actually stayed in the final track, just little glitches of synths and vocals.
And this is the point where we're kind of using live like a real sketch pad. It's the great thing about Ableton is it's really quick and fast to just whack down ideas and try stuff out, delete it, change it, try it again. And so this project is kind of that. We've got our bounce that we're working to, and it's kind of, you know, yeah, use it as a sketch pad, just kind of making sound.
We've taken the bass sound that we had and looped it up, taken small chunks of it to create a different rhythm. Just using auto panner in Ableton and also cutting it up and rebouncing it and getting the notes where we wanted them. Another trick we've done on the first note, first beat of the bar, created a sort of, I don't know what you call it, but like a dipping bass sound, which is a fair bit of pitch bend and a filter moving against the pitch bend. So you've got the pitch going down and the filter moving up like a high pass filter. That's actually layered with another variation of the same sound, which is, again, it's got exactly the same pitch bend so that they go together. When you play them together, you just get this nice fat sound. I can't really say exactly how we did that. We probably experimented, did 15 different ones, picked the best two, put them together, and that was that sound. Like, there was nothing really clever, no magical technique in there. There's just spectrum analyzer and whatever you want in terms of distortion, filtering, and pitch bend.
It's always find the first note of the drop is the hard one to get. We kind of often write a drop and it's just like, oh, it's not quite hitting. And once you get the first note really working, it can kind of change the whole track. And quite often we'll do these kind of pitch bent notes or anything to just give that first note a real, like, kind of a different sound to it, to the rest of the drop, as it were.
Yeah, if you've got your intro right, people are really waiting for that first note to happen, and actually people start or stop dancing within about one beat. If the track's right. If that first note's disappointing, then they won't be sold unless you've got a really good second note. So we've got a bass line that we kind of like. It's not particularly musical, but it's certainly sorting out the bass end of our track. We've actually left some of the guitar chords from the original track in as well. It's just one of our tricks, something that gives it that kind of Qemists-y sound. It relates it back to the intro, which has a distorted guitar in it, and it adds a bit of music over the top. Always using the spectrum analyzer to make sure it fits in the mix and that it's flat as possible. It can be difficult with electric guitar, so you have to do it really carefully. But that wasn't really quite enough to create the mid of our track, and the mid part of a bass sound is really important in dubstep. It's you can often get away with something which is just hard hitting mid and sub underneath it for the bass. So we played around with a few sounds using Massive until we came up with this little hooky thing. Really simple, but it just works so nicely with that bass line because the rhythms are.
I mean, it's this in this format. The track's still quite messy. It's still a lot of sounds, not necessarily all perfectly playing together. So the next process we'll take you through is kind of bouncing out of here and putting it in Cubase and cleaning it up. But before that, we've got this one, and it's actually a very simple Massive patch. 3 oscillators, 1, 2, 3. I'm sure you've all seen loads of Massive tutorials. 1 an octave down, and 1 an octave up, and 3 semitones. So that's given us the chord. It's like a minor third kind of chord, and they're all just on the square saw wave first oscillator in Massive, and very simply, all sent through the filter section in serial. So filter 1's running into filter 2 rather than both working at the same time, and very simply where is it? It's this one. The performance oscillator in Massive, just giving it the rhythm. Basically, it's just like performance LFO, so you can choose the curve you want. So I'm sure you've all seen it. It's just giving it this simple kind of 8th note LFO movement. And the only other thing on it is a small reverb, which I actually quite like. The reverbs in Massive in small amounts on certain synth sounds do actually kind of work really well, and you hear without it. It's kind of quite simple sounding. That reverb just kind of really brings it to life, so it's just a little added extra in there really. It's just the LFO is just perfecting the cut off of filter 1. Filter 2 is just a low pass to take out the high end really, just almost using it as an EQ.
So we've got an Ableton project with sounds we're happy with. We've got the drum part from the original Cubase bounce. We've got our bass sounds on top of that are made by resampling the sound that we left in from the original Cubase bounce, mixing it down, distorting it again, resampling it, EQing it every stage. We've got
Our first note.
We've got our Massive part, adding the mid. All together, it's completely unmixed, has no sub underneath it at the moment, but it sounds like this. Pretty mental, but we definitely got a vibe off of that, and we knew that with a bit more tweaking that we could sort that out. So then it's the laborious task of bouncing every bit and putting it into Cubase as individual tracks. So we just take the section that we finished working on, solo that part, give it a bounce, and then move on to the next one. Do that for all the parts we liked, and we're going to go back into Cubase and do a final mix of it. So now we've got all those parts from Ableton back into the Cubase project. Here they are. You can see the bass boo app that we were talking about earlier, and its other layers. So those parts have all been put back in. So the drums aren't bounced, they're as they were before we bounced them. So we can now start really messing with the mix, and we've got individual control over everything, which gives us a total of just 90 tracks to mix. So that's not too bad, and we will actually go through every individual one of those with the analyzer and EQ it. That's where the liquid mix comes in handy. The power core also, because you're going to need a lot of EQs for this. But most of the time, even using channel EQ is acceptable, especially if you're doing cutting. Boosting with any of these EQs is a bad idea. If you absolutely need to apply a boost, make sure you get your best EQ or EQ plugin and apply that boost like quite carefully, because that introduces phase distortion, which when multiplied over a loud sound system doesn't sound good. Cutting is always better. Cut and add gain. So we've also got quite a complicated bussing system going on here. The drums, layers of snares go through a snare group, that then goes to a drum group, and we've added a couple of plugins across the board, namely Character. I've got this up at 100% because it's on a send, and we're just sending bits of signal to it from across the drums. It creates extra mid is what it does. There's actually a limiter on after that to bring it up to the right level, so give us nice crunch that we can add to the drums. That's quite a good little tip. So we're running our analyzer on a separate screen now so that we can work on anything on the track and see it constantly. Always working to this -10 line here, trying to get stuff as close to it as possible, to get it as loud as possible, but not going over. With a few exceptions. Mainly down the bottom end of the spectrum, we're allowing our snare to peak over that line so that the snare can always be heard. Not necessarily vital for dubstep, but in our mix, coming from a drum and bass background, that's how we like to do it. That whole bass sound that starts to drop is over the 10 line. You can see it moving down, it hits 125, then 100, then 80, then 63. That's really going to make sure that that note is noticed, and it's not some big crash cymbal or a hi-hat or a vocal or something that comes in on that drop. It's bass that hits people first. So I've gone a bit overboard on that, but that's kind of playing it safe in a track like this. And then the sub goes over the line as well. Yeah. Very loud at 80 Hertz. If you remember, we rolled off the kick so that bass should be all by itself at 80 Hertz, and that should hit you right in the chest when that's loud.
It can depend a little bit on the key that your track's in as well. Certain keys really lend themselves to sub hitting at the right frequencies, and again how that then works with the kick. And I mean, in certain projects we have actually tuned the kick to be actually pitched it up or down to be hitting at a better place to then enable the sub to work with it. But certainly in this key, we can get away with that kind of volume down
Anything
there.
from 50 to 80 in your sub, and nice and loud, but it's not incredibly loud. I mean, you can get things up to 0, of course, but that's probably a bad idea. -5 is about as loud as you want to go with anything. It's a rule that can be broken. I mean, I've seen tracks that are mixed beautifully with the snare drum right up to 0. And other parts, but generally the higher frequencies keep them below 10, the lower frequencies take a bit more of a risk on if you want your music to be fat and bassy and warm. So that's really the technical process of making a track like this. Like I say, the technical things are just something that need to be got right in order for your track to sound good. It doesn't make or break the track. You've still got to make all these good decisions and just try and write a good track, and none of us can do it every time, but it's really a lot of work that's gone into getting the parts in the right place, and probably 90% of the stuff we made for this project was thrown away throughout the process of making this final track. Never be afraid to do that either.
Yeah, and don't let the technical part of it get in the way of the creativity. It's a fine line working between the kind of sonics and the song, and when you really join them together is when you get a killer track. But there's a lot of tracks that are no song and are just mixed really beautifully, and there's a lot of tracks out there that aren't mixed that well but are a brilliant song. So
Like everything recorded before
yeah,
1980.
just you know, a lot of people nowadays do get very caught up with the technical side of it, and some tunes you listen to, you think wicked, you're very talented, and it's all very technical and engineered perfectly, but there's no track there. It's just a load of nice sounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, just don't let. I think my advice would be, yeah, just don't let one get in the way of the other, and it's the mould of the two that will really kind of set you aside from everyone else.
Yeah, and you've got to have a vibe. Like, it might be looking right on the analyzer, but if you're not feeling it, then forget about it. You know, you're not trying to make tracks like someone else. You're not trying to make tracks like us, even if you're watching this and are going to take some of our advice. So make sure you've got that vibe at every step of the way. Sometimes, if you're used to your speakers in a certain way, making some of these changes will sound wrong to you at first. You'll think, oh, that's way too much mid. I've just like doubled the amount of mid in my track. How can that be possible? I thought it was sounding good before. Give yourself a few minutes to get used to it, and then if it's still bugging you, then chances are there is something wrong. Go back to your analyzer, see if you can notice what it is that way, rather than using your ears constantly, because using your eyes can be really helpful too.
It's the same thing like earlier on when we were talking about the kicks and snares, and certainly the kick. You often can start off with this huge kick sound that is, you know, right from 40 hertz up to 200 hertz, just like smacking really hard, and you'll EQ it to how it should really be for a kind of drum and bass or dubstep tune. And initially, like Leon says, you'll take off the bass and it won't be quite as warm, and it won't necessarily sound nicer straight away. But I think then work with it in the mix, and you'll find eventually it will sit better with everything else.
In this room, for example, 160 to 250 hertz sounds really nice. It sounds like big, fat, warm sub. It's just because of the reflections in this room. It's not true. An excess of that frequency is not going to help your mix, and it's not going to provide sub. It just sounds like it in this room. So you cut that out, and at first it doesn't sound as fat, but once you get that everything else in the mix in place, you realise that you're heading in the right direction. So it's a lot of experimentation, but a tool like an analyzer can help you move in the right track, no matter what you want to add, whether you're adding glitches or distortion or crackle or vocal harmonies. Just keep referring back to making sure that it's going to work on a sound system. And I think there's no reason not to do that, even if you're making rock music or anything really, because things being played out by DJs is so important these days for a lot of types of music, and bands that really smash it in terms of rock music production also have tracks which sound great on a sound system. I mean, how many clubs have you been to where Rage Against the Machine's been played? It was just mixed right from the start, and it will always sound good in a club. So if you want your music to be timeless, then write a good song, but you may as well get the mix as good as you can for today.
So we've been the Chemists. I hope it's been handy, kind of looking through our track and a few of the techniques we use to mix down and make the sounds. Really.
You can go and get the track in iTunes now.